Hi, I'm Deanna. I'm a robotics software engineer, and I care a lot about strategic safety, as you heard, and how being pragmatic can actually lead a team to focus on innovation without compromising on risk. So I've got a talk here to tell you about some architecture choices that I've made on the medical robot that I'm working on at the moment, but I've abstracted it a bit because I believe that this can apply these principles to the work that you're doing as well, whether it's in safety critical spaces or not. I'll just very quickly clarify a common misconception. Anytime I say the word medical, people think I'm a medical engineer. I'm 100% like pure robotics engineer, but it's just one of the perks of any software type of work that we can apply our skills to a whole range of applications, and that's certainly something that I've taken advantage of over the past 10 years of having a really varied career, always designed around social impact. So if you're in anywhere in software, you might actually also only be a half step away from a role in medical devices yourself. For now, the robot in my life at the moment is the Vexev Wave. I don't have too many pictures that I can show you just around IP, but conceptually, the challenge that we're addressing with this robot is it's a robot that through ultrasound imaging that's done automatically, where I'm blocking a huge bottleneck in getting dialysis patients access to a safe form of dialysis. And by moving an ultrasound probe around a patient arm and collecting data that gives ultimately a 3D model of their unique vasculature, we're solving a really big problem for a lot of people in this medical context, as well as paving a path for different diagnoses in the future. So here's a snapshot of the bigger team that's a part of that, but it is still early stage device. That's kind of where I like to hang out. And part of being early stage is not just that I get to work on really exciting features about, innovation around how we're actually going to collect the data that we need to reconstruct these scans in a way that's never been done before. But also it means that people are asking me questions that sometimes I don't know the answer to. So literally around a year ago, people were coming to me, how do we know that the robot is safe? Because it's not just about doing the scans, but doing them safely. And so you maybe have had a similar experience in your career where it's not only did I not know the answer to the question, but it was kind of for me a bit of a quest on what path do I go down to answer the question? So not just not having the answer, but also how do we find the answer? So I don't work alone in that. I create a community that's much bigger than just the startup that I'm in intentionally, but also within the startup, I've worked with some other engineers in answering these safety questions. So Yiga and Jamie and I were 3/4 of the robotics team, and together we have formulated this argument of how we can convince ourselves that the robot is safe. So I'm very proud of what has come out of that, the work that we will do, and more importantly, I'm proud of the work that we won't do in our risk mitigation strategy, being a bit pragmatic. And I'll ask you guys, how would you de-risk this project? I know that not everyone works, I'll tell you what it's like in robotics, a bit of context around the architecture of our system. But as I go, imagine where you would be focusing your attention if you're trying to answer the question of how to make the robot safe. So at the high level, you have controls, and this is deciding where the robot should go. And for this part, you don't even need to have a robot connected. You can do a lot of like offline planning. And I actually work remotely from Portugal, living in this space. And then you've got physical cables to the actual robot that will be controlled with some embedded code. And so bugs can happen at any of these layers, and they can be mitigated at any of these layers as well. So maybe, supervisors and watchdogs, or the use of simulator so that you can know that your motion planning is robust, for example. All of these things are possible. And the crux of kind of getting the best return on investment for de-risking is that the further down the pipeline you add your risk mitigations, the more utility they'll have. And this is important, especially for someone like me. My personality is very well suited to this work, because I'm skeptical of everything. I think that all software can fail, and this is in part just from like managing enough build farms in my time. But if we can shift away from convincing each other that the software won't fail and shifting towards robustness under the case that it will, then that's just an easier argument that will hold water even under like super extreme black swan risk cases. So if you can move towards like rejecting fake or unsafe motor commands, that's kind of the way you can be robust instead of just believing that failures won't happen. But even this is not quite the direction that we take. I mean, all of these are layers that we will eventually implement in our safety, but it's not where we started, and this is the part that I'm proud of. What's different in the robotics context to pure software is that our bugs don't hurt people. Like, bugs don't hurt people. If you think about like what can actually cause harm to people, in our case, it's like push, crush, jab, and they happen not when a bug occurs, but when a bug is actually translated into collision with a patient. So actually, where we have chosen to put our risk mitigations is in the physical space and on the actual motors themselves, limiting the physical power that they can deliver. And the way to think of this is there's a safe worst case. And this kind of intuitively is, I think we know this even as non-roboticists, when it's like, these are both motors spinning a thing, but you're only comfortable putting your hand in one of them. And so for the one on the right, the safe worst case is so unsafe that you are relying on different sort of like equipment to not injure yourself, whereas you could give the hand fan to a child and it just inherently has less risk, and so you don't need to convince someone won't put their finger in it. It is by itself has a safer worst case. So that's the dream state of a robotic system. Admittedly, it's not possible for all medical robots, but it turns out that it is possible for ours. And so we've been doing demos at our company of kind of like the before and after of like different karate chop with spaghetti and eggs and this sort of thing to express this to the non-roboticists in our team. And why this talk exists is because as part of that, one of my colleagues he commented like, I found it enlightening that you found a way to de-risk that was beyond even the firmware and exists in the physical realm. And when he said that, I realized that I didn't always think this way. So now we get into sort of the more abstract part, just to wrap up, of like, I didn't always think about safety architecture in this way. I didn't always think about risk in this way. And there are some moments in my life or like my career where I learned some really important things that ultimately shape how I have designed the safety work on this robot. And safety isn't really taught at university, so part of doing this talk is to kind of spread this way of thinking that maybe can help other people save time as well. So the first is that I remember 3 years into my career, I was working on the robot operating system in Silicon Valley, and I had made myself this mantra of like, just because it can be done doesn't mean it should. And maybe you also had that moment in your career where you first separated like technical progress from actual impact. And it's like, okay, not every feature has the same impact. And so this was where it began for me. And a few years after that, I had someone expand, sort of give me enlightenment that reasoning can apply to testing as well. So I was working at a company making a bioprinter, and the software lead there, I was trying to make robust unit tests because we'd seen a particular failure mode in the comms, I think, and he was saying like, not everything needs to be super robustly tested. There are some failure modes that we can just tolerate better than others. So this, I remember exactly where I was when that light bulb kind of went on of like, just because it can fail doesn't mean that it matters. And thinking about like impact there as well. And then the third, sort of tying it back into the medical context, is when I was designing a skin printing surgical robot in my previous role. We were working with compressed air and getting guidance on like how to design the compressor for compliance. And if you have a tank, people would ask us, well, what if can the tank explode? What if the air compressor pump gets like stuck on and it's pumping? And we got insight or advice from people of like, well, just make it so that the pump can never pump hard enough that the tank would explode. And that was super like insightful moment for me of like, oh my gosh, if we can do this thing of like inherent safety and just limit the power of our equipment, then we have an easier safety argument. So back to what might be relevant to your work. Keep these in your pocket for whenever asking the question might be relevant, maybe like in a calendar notification or something, but like, what failures are you overprotecting that actually perhaps it's not a big deal if they occur? And where can you get the biggest return on investment for your risk mitigations? Because the failures that you see aren't necessarily the failures that are worth de-risking if you can push something down really low level. And then around inherent safety, like, what's a risky piece of your system that you can actually limit the power of so that it itself is fail-safe? And if you can find that, it's like, we all know to be a bit skeptical of scripts that want pseudo access for like the whole script. And you're like, if you can design it without needing that, then people will be less skeptical of you. So I think this applies to many more contexts than just medical. But I'll say that the reason why, at least in the medical context, this is really important is because intentional risk architecture, and obviously it matters for safety. We need to be able to convince not just ourselves and our regulatory bodies and customers that the device is going to not do any harm. But the reason that being pragmatic about it matters is because people are waiting for the device that we're developing. And so if we spend time working on safety mitigations that don't overall increase the safety, then that's not the best use of our limited resources. And also, if we could be spending those time improving features, then as a product, this is where we give more utility to sort of the world, if you will, is by getting our product to market as soon as possible, because people's lives are being lost while they're waiting for access to the scans that our device can do. Beyond that, it means that we can really accelerate our development if it allows us to justify in that high level stack. Now we use a lot of open source, off the shelf being the key thing, robotics features that, you know, ordinarily people would think are not compatible with safety critical systems. But if you get the safety architecture right, and you can have something that is robust to failure, and you don't have to make the argument that it will never fail, but it will have a safe worst case if it does, then I believe that this is a big part of what has helped us already the past 6 months. We've started our first clinical trials. So of course, can't take entire credit for that, but I think that there's a lot that can be said about having a healthy relationship with risk. And like I said, if you are intentional and pragmatic about it, then you can let your dev teams focus on the innovation without compromising on risk. So I hope, let's see. Oh yeah, there we are in dialysis clinics, our ultimate goal. So thanks for listening. There's certainly more that can be said about safety. I'd be happy to chat. There's many more topics than would have been covered here. So please ask any questions that you have, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Deanna, can you hear me? Yeah, cool. Well, thank you very much. It was very, very, very interesting. So I have a number of questions for you. We're even getting votes on the questions. So I'm going to go with the first one. How did you get into robotics? Was it from uni days, or did you change into it? Any suggestions for anyone inspired now after watching your talk?
The first question I would ask is if you want to get into working around robots or being a roboticist, because in all of these products, there's DevOps teams and there's data science teams, and like, you don't have, I want to be the robotics engineer, and so I got into it through a master's. But if you just want to be around robotics and working on hardware, then you probably are already more than qualified. You just need to see that not everyone in a particular discipline has to have that skill set. So actually, one of the engineers that I showed, she didn't study mechatronics explicitly, but I know that people can learn the very high level of robotics if they're good learners.
Nice, nice. Thank you. What practical steps can someone take to shift risk left when they write code?
See risk less? What's the question?
Shift risk left. I imagine
shift risk left. Okay.
the risk, right?
Yeah. I thought you said see risk less.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I'll answer that just because it's tying up my mentor resources. Seeing risk less for me is pulling the thread of like what would happen if actually it went wrong. And not just stopping at something could go wrong. It's like, yeah, but then what would happen? Sometimes you just notice that something's gone wrong, and so you can ignore it. As for shifting safety left, it's like to consider a safe worst case as one of your like design inputs, and really a feature that you spend time on at the beginning of your product, then means that all of your features downstream can be as hacky as you want, and you're not bringing that, you're not threatening to cause any harm greater than your worst case. So to actually invest time at the beginning on having a safe worst case and deciding what that looks like, and then making sure nobody ever compromises on that worst case, that is just so liberating in a company that's trying to, you know, push the boundaries and have high velocity innovation, in my experience.
Good. I have a couple more. I have a good number of questions, but you know, time is a tyrant. You know, so how stressful is it to write software where a bug can hurt people?
Yeah, I like this question because I think that this is where people think, that's where a lot of people stop. They see a bug could hurt people, And this is where a lot of people rule out, for example, robot operating system. They say, well, that can't coexist with medical devices. And the two things that people can, I don't find it stressful because I have intentionally thought about the ways that things can go wrong. And that's where people stop doing that. And so thinking about something could go wrong and therefore it will, obviously there's another way of doing it where you just assume that things will never go wrong. I never advocate for that. That doesn't appease my anxiety at all. I'm very nervous around people who just assume that things won't go wrong. But if you assume that things will go wrong and then you quantify actually how bad it would be, it's not risky. It doesn't feel stressful to me. And this is what's different about, I will say explicitly that we're working on an imaging robot. That is an easier place to be than working on a surgical robot, because when you get into like robots that are holding knives, it's a bit less separable. Your safe worst case overlaps with actually what you need the robot to do, and that's a trickier situation to tease out, but it still can be done. So yeah, I don't find it stressful because of the intentional thinking that I've done. And there was something else that I had in mind, but maybe it'll come up in the next question.
Yeah, probably come on. This is going to be the last question I have a good number of them. So before I ask you this question, I invite everybody to connect with you. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, so you can ask her the questions that you have left. And as the last question, so what's the risk that you wish that you had caught earlier? What's the risk that you wish you caught earlier? I can ask for a
well,
applause.
I think in general, no, I think it's an argument that a system is safe is only as robust as the sort of ability of the person making the argument to engage with like reality of black swan risk, as opposed to saying that'll never happen. And so as time goes on, people and open my eyes to more assumptions that we're leaning on, that if you lean on them as part of your safety argument, your argument will fall apart. So we have motors will report values, and through that you have forward kinematics. That's how you know where the ultrasound probe is. And if we wanted to lean on the probe position as part of our safety argument, then you need to have reliable motor encoder reporting. And so we nearly lent on that, but then I have a mentor, since I did that talk that I posted a screenshot of, who pointed out that for safety monitoring at the end effector, you need to have safe quality level motor reporting. And so so we were near risk, but dodged it just because of the mentorship. And I think that the other risk that we are near, and this is what I was thinking of in the other question, is like the device that we're making intentionally is using ultrasound imaging. But we could have chosen to make a device that uses X-ray imaging or something, because that's another way that you can make models of 3D, or that's a way that you can image vasculature. And if we went with X-ray imaging, then our whole experience, our whole design experience around, prototyping, development, and risk would be completely different than using something that is inherently safe as ultrasound that we use on like neonatal scans. And so these design choices, making them intentionally, I think is the reason why we find it easy to sleep at night, and also just easier to get into trials, is because we've intentionally designed a robot that is safe worst case.
Thank you very much, Deanna, for being with us tonight. A big round of applause.
Thanks for the questions. I'll see you online.